Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The show is about to begin.
Welcome to the podcast, concerts that made us, interviews and stories, tales from the bus. We love taking you back to when it all went down. The greatest live shows and that cheering crowd sound. It's concerts that made us, concertsthatmadeus.com.
Lucy Kruger, you're very welcome to Concerts That Made Us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. So, before we get into your music, I have to ask, Lucy Kruger and the Lost Boys, is it inspired by Peter Pan or the vampire film?
Yeah, I would like to say the vampire film, but it's definitely Peter Pan.
I was thinking.
Subconscious influence there.
Yeah. Yeah. So you released Autobiography of an Evening on March 11th. Would you like to tell us a bit about it?
Yes. It's the third single from a record that I have coming out called Teen Tapes for Performing Your Own Stunts. And what can I say about it? I just actually, when I wrote it, I just finished reading a book called Autobiography of Red, which is a book by Anne Carson, who it's a kind of a lyric novel, and so it's written in verse, and so it has a very interesting musical quality to it. But yeah, there was something about her, the way she used metaphor, that I had never seen or read before or felt before. Just like, I don't know, sometimes I imagine you could discover a new color or something that wasn't on the color palette, that you'd never seen before, you know. And I think that somehow you think with language, or with music, I guess, like, so much has been done, it's all been done, I haven't had that so much where you read something and you're like, wow, this is it's describing familiar feelings, like deeply familiar feelings, but in this totally new way. It was extremely inspiring, and I was like, I'm going to write a song now, because I can feel this, like, and just excited by the possibility of what creating can do, and the newness that is possible, you know.
Yeah, that you mentioned, it seems like everything has been done, you know. There's all the colors have been discovered, all songs have been done already. It must be a very daunting feeling for a musician, thinking, you know, all the greats that have come before have done it all. It's hard to come up with something new. How do you approach that kind of feeling?
I don't know, because, you know, I was thinking about it the other day, and I was thinking, it's so strange that we all still continue to write, well, not everyone obviously, but often in like a verse chorus kind of a way. And then I was thinking, maybe it's not so, like, it's also familiarity that makes stuff meaningful to us. If everything is completely new all the time, there's no referencing, and like, we make meaning through context, you know. And so actually it's like variations on things that I think are what makes something meaningful, you know. Yeah, it's like, if something was completely new and had no reference point, I don't know if it would particularly, so I don't know, it's like somehow like this, it's a challenge, but at the same time it's like a gift to be speaking to things that exist, you know.
Yeah, you need that touch of familiarity.
Yeah, and repetition, you know, like, we need repetition. I think that's how we make sense of things. And you mentioned your upcoming album, which is out on the 8th of April. It's the final one in a trilogy of tapes. That's the overall project seems very interesting. It started with sleeping tapes for some girls. Now, just so the listeners are aware, this isn't an album where you're doing ASMR to put people to sleep. Would you like to tell us about the overall project? Yeah, so I guess when I made Sleeping Tapes for some girls, I wasn't that was, well, actually, even the album initially wasn't necessarily ever going to be an album. It was very much, I was living, me and my partner had split, and I was, I think, having a bit of a hard, I mean, it's a bit literal, but I was really literally having a bit of a hard time sleeping. And I was listening a lot to female, it just happened to be female singer-songwriters, and found an incredible companionship in that. And when I started to write songs over that time, it was really and it's easier to tell this from a distance, I guess, but it was a very kind of strained and necessary and quiet conversation that I was having with myself. And then when I started to notice the nature of the songs, I thought, actually, I would really love to make something that I would need over this time. And then I decided to call it that. And once I'd given it a name, it focused the album a lot. And it was really lovely to work like that, because then I knew what would belong in there and like where things should. And then when I moved to Berlin just after I finished mixing that record. And when I started to write new material, it also took on a very particular quality. And I wasn't necessarily, I was just kind of writing, and then another shift happened in my life, and I just kept writing over this time. But then I kind of at some point like noticed these very sort of clear chapters and how they spoke to each other. And then, so before I started recording the next two albums, I made that decision. And so then I continued to write and create, like produce with that in mind, of this kind of like a very, in a way, Sleeping Tapes is really done in the bedroom. And then I moved to Berlin. And so there's really a sense of literal and metaphorical movement. And it's kind of in a very sort of simplistic way, this sort of sleeping tapes, and then a kind of waking, and then the third is a kind of entering or exiting, whichever way. Yeah.
I love how they're like, someone could put all three of them on and follow your journey almost. It's like telling the story of a journey,
Yeah, for sure.
You don't get that with a lot of records at the moment. But how has the reception been so far?
Oh, I find this is always difficult for me. I'm not really sure, to be honest. And I have this strange, I mean, people are lovely, and they, I guess what I'm saying is I try not to think about it too much, because I'm going to do what I do regardless. And I hope not in a sort of self-centered way of like, this is my, like, I think that it makes the most sense to not allow too much external influence in terms of what you're offering. And what I offer, I mean to offer. It's not like I'm having my own experience, and if someone wants to listen to it, they can. Like, obviously it is a thing of wanting to share, but it's hard to gauge reception, and the typical ways with which to do it, I suppose, or the more practical ways are in numbers, and I really try to avoid focusing too much on that.
Yeah. It's they can be the downfall at times, and they've become such an important part of every creative process as a way to gauge your success. But I don't think it should be like that, because you focus too much on the numbers, and it can affect what you're creating. You'll get wrapped up in too much.
Yeah, very much. And I think I think it might be idealism, but it's not actually. But it might be impractical, because but I do, for me, like the work that I find the most interesting from artists is when people really follow their own sort of particular voice a long way down, and end up in a space of, like, it's not a process you can cheat, they end up creating in a way that's so particular to them, and that's come from just time experimenting with their own particular expression, Yeah, I think that can be quite damaged by being too, yeah, because I guess things move in trends, you know, as well. And if you don't fall into that, I don't know. The other thing that I think about is, you know, it's either that you're going to be influenced by your kind of success in a way that you're going to, how do I say this simply? I'm not going to stop doing what I do. And so how people respond and whether they receive it, it's lovely, but it's not going to change anything, hopefully.
Yeah.
It makes one financial situation more or less complicated, but outside of that, you know.
True. But I suppose as well, you touched on something there as well, that it can tend to change a performer or a musician at times. You see these musicians and it's like when they get successful, they lose track of where they came from, so to speak, you know, and it changes the creative output they put out. And that could, you know, at times that can lose fans, because you gain fans by what you are, what you put out. Then if that totally changes, you could alienate some fans, you know?
Yeah, I guess it's also just such a, I guess it can be because of the nature of things and how things move. It can be quite an unreliable indicator, I think. I don't know. It's still something I guess this relationship between public and private and well, what's the other thing, like financial and emotional something, it's like a constant thing that I guess people who are trying to make a living from the art will grapple with always.
Yeah. True. So what can people expect from the upcoming chapter in the trilogy compared to the others?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more like my decision was to play with a plectrum and a fuzz pedal, which I haven't really done before, and so it sounds kind of like there's a certain juvenile quality to it, because there's a certain lack of skill that I try to deliberately give into, because the whole point of the album in a way is to be willfully playful, and to like the fear and the tapes is kind of about trying to give into feeling again, and giving into feeling results in a kind of a necessary messiness that I think can be tempting to avoid, but is very dangerous to avoid in human life. And so yeah, it's kind of like a bit, it's a bit like angsty or something, but in a kind of, it's a love album basically, which you would think would make it kind of sweet, but it's not that. It's like all the intensity of love and feeling, and it's kind of all in there, you know, in a slightly juvenile but not insincere way. Well, no, that's wrong. Juvenile doesn't indicate insincere at all. Yeah, it's kind of angsty, but in a very loving way, I think.
Right. And would you say you're happy that this is the final one in the trilogy? Is there any chance that you'll revisit it later and add a couple more chapters in?
Yeah, I am happy. It's the final one in the sense of it's sort of like I was actually my the guy who I engineer with was saying to me the other day, I've kind of gone, it's like Benjamin Button or something, because the Sleeping Tape like this, it's really like introverted kind of older feeling, and then Teen Tapes this kind of like rocking out in my bedroom quality. But it's kind of the point, you know, it's like that regression is not the right word, but some concept of that, like returning is somehow actually progressing, and neither of those words are quite right, but I think the feeling is there. And I had a thought to carry on with the tapes because I had another idea, but then I thought, I think that there's such an immense autobiographical quality to these tapes, which I was good and right and necessary, but also quite challenging. I think, like, I was speaking to some friends about it the other day, and it's quite strange to have a project that's Lucy Kruger and the Lost Boys, because you're navigating a sort of artistic identity, but it's also your name, you know, and so that can be quite confusing. And I think that the stuff that I make going forward, who knows? I mean, I think my stuff will always have some autobiographical quality, but less overtly so, I think.
Yeah.
And I do think it sort of did the job of what I wanted it to do. Like it was a kind of like purging or something, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you feel about writing so personally? Is it do you find it a bit intrusive, or is it like a release? Are you happy to do it, or would you prefer to take a step back and say write from a character's point of view?
Yeah, I don't know. I think about this so often, and sometimes when I listen to artists speak about it, then I feel like, oh, I'm actually just a very amateur artist for always speaking so personally, because it's sort of like relying on a guttural feeling of like a therapeutic process or something. And then I feel a bit ashamed, like, oh, I should be writing more complex characters that don't just have to come from my like over emotional state or something. But and also I think another interesting thing is that I don't write, and especially because I write really from the start very much alone, I really don't write with the intention of people listening. Of course, it must be in there somewhere. Like, it's naive to say, I know that I'm going to share these songs, but it's not the strong feeling that's with me. And I think that there's so many different, music is kind of interesting in that way, and that there's really different places. And the writing is one thing, the recording is another thing, and then the performing is another thing. And you don't necessarily think about the performing when you're doing the writing. And so I'm in this particular state. And then when I'm share performing, it's something else, you know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel to me, it's not really, I know that for some people that seems like a very scary thing, but it's not really for me. I don't understand why. It should be. It's quite absurd to like read your diary or sing your diary to, but it doesn't, I don't find it so, especially because I think it's, you know, I guess what makes people afraid, or what can be very scary, is a genuine vulnerability. And I don't think when a song is framed, when a feeling is framed in a song, that's a very safe place for me. It would be different if I had to stand up and tell everyone how I felt or something, but I'm singing a song. That's a totally different thing, you know. And I think at the performance stage of things, I've come to think that in a lot of ways, it's like a method of communicating. And the songs are of course important, but in some strange way, they're almost secondary to the live, like the act of engagement, you know. And because the song was written from a place of sincerity, and my want to share live is sincere, it is a true thing, but it's very different. I know that some people, I don't, like, if I'm singing the songs live, I'm not necessarily like going back into that exact space.
Yeah.
You know, so they become something else all the time. And I'm comfortable with that. Like, it brings me a lot of peace, actually.
Yeah. And so you're based in Berlin now, but you started off in South Africa with your band Medicine Boy. What brought you to Berlin?
Well, when André and I from Medicine Boy, when we first, I mean, South Africa is a wonderful place. It's quite, for a lot of reasons, very complicated to try and make a living there as a musician, because I think that how we imagine you could make a living is through touring. I'm still trying to figure out whether that's true, but to tour there, it's very isolated. There's not a big touring circuit at all, and because of the visa situation, to get to Europe and to try tour we did it twice, but it was extremely complicated, and we sort of thought, if we want to give this a go, we have to try and move. And so that, in very simple terms, that was the reason. But also, I suppose, just a bit of an adventure, and you know, it's difficult to I guess we wanted to also feel what it would be like to be able to immerse ourselves into a musical scene. And I suppose when I say scene, I don't know what I meant then, and I don't know what I mean now, but also in very simple terms, just being able to see the bands that you love. Which you can't, it's challenging in South Africa. There's a really beautiful scene there in a way, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it's based on community and a need for music. But smaller, sort of middle-sized bands don't really come to South Africa very easily because it's very expensive and there's not much of a touring circuit, as I said. So, yeah.
I've actually spoke to some artists from South Africa in the past, and I totally get what you're saying. It doesn't seem like there is a massive scene there for bands, or especially in the rock genre. So I can totally understand why you would make the leap to go to Berlin, but I've actually never spoke to an artist based in Berlin before. What's the music scene like there now?
It's also so hard to speak about it, to be honest, from my perspective, because I've been here almost 3.5 years, maybe close to 4 now. But the last 2.5 have been extremely different landscape to what it was before. And so, in a way, I'm still figuring it out. And I think the first year, I was so extremely overwhelmed that and kind of broke that it was quite hard to. I think I was just sort of trying to survive a little bit in my head, and I didn't know myself as much as I might have wanted to. But you can see something amazing every night in Berlin. Everybody comes to Berlin. Like it's there's so many shows here going on all the time. There's been over the last years there have been a really nice sort of musical group of friends, but it is also a challenging place in some ways, in that it's a very big city and a lot of people are coming in and out. And so I think it can be a bit challenging to form tight-knit communities.
Yeah.
I'm still figuring it out a bit, and one has to be, I guess, whenever one moves to a new place or ever in life, in order to be involved in things, you have to be a bit brave and you have to be quite willing to play. And I'm still working on it, I think. So I'll have to maybe come back to you about that.
Yeah, I suppose you have to be prepared to take the leap, But what was? Go on.
No, so what did I want to say now? I think it's also, it's so interesting, but I think when I first moved to Cape Town, which was after university, there was a kind of want to like go out and to meet and to like, I was absorbing inspiration from humans in such a clear way. And now I feel, I guess I'm 33 this year, and I somehow feel like I need to, or want to, I don't know which, draw inspiration a bit more from not quiet down, but like one can absorb a lot of external influence, but then I need time to sort of integrate it, So it's interesting to find that balance, because like I said, there's so much in Berlin. But if you're working on your own sort of ideas or your craft, that also requires some kind of isolation, and that balance is interesting to find in Berlin.
Yeah, I'd say that. Geez, that must be very difficult to find that balance, actually, with so much going on. But how was, over the last 2.5 years, how was the music industry affected in Berlin?
I guess like everywhere else, everything was just cancelled. But there is a lot more. I don't know how the rest of the world works. I know how South Africa is a little bit, and there was a lot more support here. Well, there was opportunity for support. So, like I got some funding to make a couple of things, which is the first time I've ever had that experience. That I could, just be sitting and working on things. It's really amazing. So I think one's still going to really. I think it's hard to even tell at this point how big the impact has been, because I suppose a lot of places have had to close, and but I don't know. In a way, things are just starting to open up again here. So I suppose we'll see.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
there is more. So there's definitely a fair amount of support here.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great to hear, because I know over
Yeah.
here, once everything closed down, I think we were one of the first countries in Europe to totally shut off live music, but there was no support for any of the musicians or bands. They were just stuck in limbo for 2.5 years. But as you said, it's starting to take off again, and they've been given free run to have as many gigs as they want. So hopefully it can get back to some sort of normality now.
It's crazy, because it was already so difficult before, I can see here that, there's a lot of, I think there's also venues and stuff that get, I don't know, I still don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm still quite new to it, but there's definitely, when we tour here, there's some venues that you go to that are completely funded by the government. And I can't imagine now how venues and bands do it without support, because it's so hard to make, if it's just a profit driven thing, it's incredibly challenging to try and make it work.
Yeah.
So and then to do it to go 2 years without even that little profit, it's a bit inconceivable to me how it's supposed to survive, which is very, very sad.
Yeah. I imagine now, though, that things are opening back up. There's the competition is quite stiff. I imagine everyone is rushing to try get those gigs and play those venues.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like I said, it was already tough. So I don't know. It's such a it's kind of a mad thing to try to.
Yeah. So we might touch on your gigs in the past for a bit. What can people expect when they come to see one of your gigs or concerts?
I think that I'm not really somebody who feels like the live show really needs to be a representation of the record. I really love performing. It's my favorite thing, and it's a little bit terrifying, but in a good way, in a way that says one really cares. I kind of have a bit of a love for the slightly dramatic. Like I kind of go to a concert to feel,
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to give that also. And I think that the more that I do it, especially with the Lost Boys stuff, I think for a while my solo stuff was a bit quite down tempo and quite introverted, and maybe it's still that, but in a more externalized way or something. I think the band at the moment, the band that I've built up in Berlin, it's really wonderful, and there's a lot of I think there's a lot of play between extremes a little bit. So I think because some of the material is really introverted and really quiet, and the new album, some of it's a bit more loud and a bit more intense. Like I think it's well, what am I saying? I suppose I really have always liked playing quite a bit with silences and very empty spaces.
Yeah.
But those are mostly quite impactful when there's a contrast,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy very present and engaging performers, and that's kind of what I hope to be. But it's still, I guess it changes all the time. That's also a kind of a nice thing, I think. I wondered for a while whether it's necessary to try and be specific and shape a performance, but actually, especially because we play in so many different kinds of environments still. I guess when a band gets to a certain level, then they can control the spaces that they play in the environments a lot more. But I think we're still at a stage where we are playing a lot of different venues, and it's kind of lovely to let those spaces influence how things happen a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that one could come to 2 different shows and have 2 quite different experiences.
Brilliant. I love to hear that, because for one, I hate going to a gig or a concert and it's just like putting the record on. You know,
Yeah,
you
I also
need
don't
something
understand.
different.
Yeah. Yeah, I also really like it if somehow, and I still would love to push that even further, but when the stakes are quite high, so, you know, you're in a point of tension that's not unpleasant, but you're slightly, like, you can tell that something could happen that wasn't planned, you know. It keeps you a bit more, yeah, and somehow it also pulls you into a level of responsibility, you know, because if you can tell that the atmosphere is shifting the room, you as an audience member are contributing to that, you know, in the way that you're giving or the way that you're interacting, and then something can really happen in a room, you know.
Yeah, it becomes much more than a gig. It's more of an experience for all involved.
Exactly, which I really love. Yeah.
Can you cast your memory back to the very first gig you ever played and tell us a bit about that?
Wow. You know, it was probably, but I wouldn't be able to be too specific now because I can't remember. I have a terrible memory, which makes me so sad. Really, it does. Maybe it's a good thing, but I started playing guitar when I was 16 or 17, and there used to be a guitar club in Johannesburg, where I grew up. And I think they would have like 4 acts a night where you would play 2 songs or something. And my sister-in-law, who wasn't my sister-in-law at that time, she had started playing. And I can remember her, I'm just going to jump around a bit now, but I can remember her once we were on holiday and she was playing, what's the, don't it always seem to go that you don't know? Regular Taxi by Joni Mitchell. And she's got such a beautiful voice, and she's got such a, but seeing her being able to share that casually in this room and transform the space and offer something so specific to her was so extremely moving for me. And I was like, I want to do that, you know, because I think I'd always been involved in like school performances and choirs, but there's a different thing, you know, where you were you really offering this experience just so simply or something? Anyway, and she used to perform there, and so I'm pretty sure that by the time that I had gotten to a point where I could sort of string something together, I probably played there, because I played there a couple of times, and I can remember I'm trying to remember exactly how it felt. I imagine quite liberating to, and also because I think as soon as I could play even a little bit, I started writing my own songs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, pretty terrible, I'm sure, but that I can remember and imagine that was very exciting, you know, to be able to, to make something, and share that.
Yeah.
If
you had to pick one overall, is there a gig that stands out as the best experience you've had?
I mean, the one that comes to mind now is, it comes to mind for a number of reasons, but probably because it was the most, I gave it a lot of power even before it happened, and afterwards in tribute to the memory. And so it was documented in a way, in a very severe way, which is probably why I have to think of it now. But there were lots of others, of course, but Medicine Boy, we're a band for about 5 years. And then at some point we decided actually we needed to stop the band because I think both of us felt like we were inhibiting each other more than we were expanding. But André, my bandmate in Medicine Boy, he was part of a collective called Psych Night in South Africa, and they organized this festival they started this collective called Psychonaut, and they used to bring down smaller like psychedelic and alternative bands, which was a really big deal in South Africa. And it really brought together a very strong community. And then they started to do this festival, which called Endless Days, which was on the coast in Cape Town. And they would bring down a few international acts, but a lot of local acts. And it was a really, really amazing festival. And I guess it was really our community in a way. And we had played all of them. And then we decided we would have our final show there. And invited a lot of friends to come and play with us. And I can remember before thinking, because I can get so like, I want to get the performance right, and I want to like that you kind of forget to have fun or something.
Yeah.
And I was so determined. I was like, there are all these amazing people around us, and the engineers were people that we had worked with for ages. They were really on board, and the audience was mostly people that we knew who kind of had been part of this whole journey, and just surrounded by like, it's like when you go to a birthday party or a funeral or something, you know, and everyone knows that the focus, there's like a letting go of certain things and a sort of focus on something good and something powerful, and
like a celebration.
Also, exactly, a huge celebration. And also when you're surrounded, there were so many beautiful musicians on stage, and I just thought like nothing can go wrong here. If you're held by so many brilliant people. And then just to go like to feel so clearly what music can do, you know, in terms of all the people that it brings together, and the kind of, and then just an enormous celebration, but musically, you know. That was just a very special moment.
Yeah. And to flip it around then, is there an experience you would say was the worst, and how did you deal with it?
Well, now the one that comes to mind is, I remember when I first moved to Cape Town, well, there were a couple, but I just took anything I could get. And three kind of come to mind, but there was one where I played at this little bar, and there was two people in the audience sitting on a couch on their cell phones.
Right.
And I actually I turned around like this and had a tiny little cry. And then I turned around and kept playing. And there was also one actually where I went to play in a shopping center. This sort of clothing brand had said, will you come play? And I thought it would just be a little set and shop. I mean, now I know this is completely absurd, but I arrived at the shopping center and I took my guitar in, and when I got there, there was no it's just this little clothing shop, and there was no amplification or anything, and I sing extremely softly. Right. So I just had to stand very uncomfortably in the shop playing my very sad songs, which I can't imagine did anything for anyone. And then when I had to leave, I couldn't find my car because I'm very forgetful, and I'd been on the phone when I arrived, and so I hadn't noted where I was. And I think I looked for about 20 minutes. Like I had a tiny blister on my hand, even from carrying my guitar. And it turned out in the end that the elevator was broken and it wasn't stopping on a particular lift where my car was. But anyway, in the end, it was quite funny because it was just added to the poetry of the complete disaster that was.
Jeez. Yeah. I think though it's experiences like that, along with the good experiences, build you as an artist and a performer. Totally. It's super interesting to feel also what music does and what your music does in different spaces. I also played a couple of markets where I got very aggressive responses. Really?
Like a kind of like you're making the customers want to kill themselves kind of a feeling. You know?
Oh my gosh.
And then it was like, okay, so this is not the right atmosphere for which I knew, you know, but yeah, when you can feel where it's safe to take your music, you know.
Yeah.
And it's so relative, I guess. Yeah. And it is interesting to feel, I think.
Yeah. And the last gig you've played, what was that?
Oh, yeah. So when I went to South Africa, I went back to South Africa for 2.5 months now. And for the first month, I had actually all the Lost Boys from Berlin were there except one of them, and we played 3 shows. But then they all left, and I was still there, except André from Medicine Boy, who also still plays in the Lost Boys sometimes. The rest of the band left, and I decided to do one more show, and so I did it with all the old Lost Boys. and it was 41 degrees in the town that we played in.
Oh.
And I was quite nervous about the show because it was an entirely new band. I mean, an old band, but a new band. But it was actually just wonderful. Also, I think because it was so hot, like for the first time, the topic of Corona took a backseat to the weather.
Yeah.
And to somehow feel that like sweaty mess of performance and audience was so good, because it's so deliberately sterile for the last 2.5 years. I mean, it probably in the end wasn't the safest, but or definitely wasn't, but it was wonderful to feel. Yeah,
I could imagine back to normal almost.
Yeah.
So before we move on to the last couple of questions, what are the future plans?
That's a good question. I just to make records and to play, to perform them. I'd still love to, I'm still finding my feet here and still figuring it all out. And I think for a while that's still what I would like to be doing. In that obvious way of spending time, I'm always writing, and then I'm still learning how to make records sound how I want them to make. I somehow find in live performance it's easier to find what I want, but recording is such a different process. So for the next little while, that is my plan.
Brilliant. Now, these questions, I'm afraid everybody gets them, so you can't get off the podcast until you answer, I'm afraid.
Okay, no problem.
If you could see any artist or performer from history for one night only, who would it be?
I don't know. I have sometimes, I'm a bit blocked there, but I suppose because Joni Mitchell meant so much to me at a point, and still does, and because I'm so what she did and the time that she did it in, so incredible. I would love to see. I mean, I would even love to see her now, but I know that's not possible. But to have seen her then, and to have been in a room during that time in that kind of place. I mean, actually, and fucking Nina Simone, like, I would fucking love to see Nina Simone. Yeah.
That'd be pretty epic now.
Yeah,
the two of them.
And my heart hurt, like it beats very fast at the thought of it. Yeah.
And I have a feeling I know the answer to this one, but if you could spend 24 hours in a room with any artist or performer from history, who would it be?
Oh, it's so tough because, watching someone perform and spending time with them as a person is such a different thing. I don't know. I guess I would be curious to, like, are you allowed to ask them questions, or are you just casually hanging out?
You can spend the time however you choose.
I don't know why now I'm thinking of I feel a bit silly saying this because I don't. But I now have to, maybe because I was looking at her stuff yesterday, but like somebody like Pina Bausch, she's a theatre maker.
Oh.
Like somebody that also deals in such, I don't know, sometimes I think that musicians are such like guttural impulse, like their art form is so immediate, and so and somebody like Pina Bausch is creating all these, like I'd love to speak to her about how she feels about performance and what it is and what it means and what it does, and maybe that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I like that answer now. I like the mindset behind coming to that answer. You know, you're not just picking someone you idolize just to hang out with them. You want to actually engage and learn from them.
Yeah, because I mean, it must be terrifying to hang out casually with somebody that you know, and personalities are such different things. So I don't think like, yeah, if you have a chance to be able to, yeah, I would have to do a lot of research before that day though.
Yeah. And the final one, if there was a song that could appear on the soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
Do you think I could just go into Logic and put the whole of Blue as one song? It's cheating, but
Yeah, I'll allow it.
well, I was trying to think on Blue, like which song in particular, but yeah, it's just the perfect album. And I remember when I heard it, it was really a turning point for me of, yeah, somebody who can strip away all the fluff or something, all the like overly poetic and overly just very raw, but not in like a in a very strong, I don't know how to explain it. It's very brave somehow. Yeah.
Another answer I like. Great answer. Well, listen, I've really enjoyed chatting to you for the last hour and getting an insight into your music.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was nice to speak about it. It's interesting to hear your own, how you reveal how you feel about things to yourself as well, you know, so thanks for that.
No.
Welcome to the podcast, conscience that made us, interviews and stories, tales from the bus. We love taking you back to when it all went down. The greatest live shows and that cheering crowd sound. It's concerts that made us, concerts that made us.com.